Before we begin our journey into the world of secrets and shadows, let's take a moment to quiet our minds and settle in. Find a comfortable position, let your body sink into the soft support beneath you, and feel a gentle wave of relaxation wash over you, starting from the tips of your toes and slowly rising all the way to the top of your head. As you breathe in, imagine you're drawing in peace and tranquility, and as you exhale, release all the worries and tensions of the day. Your mind is like a calm lake now, its surface still and reflective, ready to absorb the gentle whispers of a story waiting to unfold. There is nothing to do, nowhere to be, except here, in this peaceful moment, with your mind drifting gently toward the edge of sleep. Tonight, we will explore some of history's greatest mysteries. Not the kind with hidden treasure maps or forgotten ruins, but the ones buried under layers of secrecy and deception. These are the stories of truths concealed, of facts twisted, and of events erased from the public record. Our first story takes us back to the early years of the Cold War, a time when the world was gripped by a new kind of fear. A fear not of invasion by armies, but of an unseen enemy, a silent, pervasive threat that could be anywhere and anyone. This was the era of the space race, of nuclear paranoia, and of a quiet, relentless battle for technological and ideological supremacy between two global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. In this climate of suspicion and high-stakes competition, a series of unexplained events began to occur, sparking rumors and conspiracy theories that would echo for decades. One of the most enduring and unsettling of these is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Imagine the bitter cold of the Ural Mountains in February 1959. A group of 10 experienced hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, sets out on a challenging expedition. They are all highly skilled, well-equipped, and knowledgeable about the terrain. Their goal is to reach a mountain called Otorten, a name that in the local Mansi language means "don't go there," a chilling coincidence that would later be noted with a shiver. One of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, falls ill early on and is forced to turn back. He is the last person to see his friends alive. The remaining 9 continue their journey into the desolate, snow-covered landscape. They set up their camp on the slopes of Kolatsiakal, or Dead Mountain, another name that seems to be a grim foretelling of the tragedy to come. Their plan is to rest for the night and continue the ascent the next day. But the next day, and the day after that, passes with no word from the group. When they fail to return by their scheduled date, a search party is dispatched. What they find defies all logical explanation and has since become one of the most puzzling unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. The search party finds the group's tent, half buried in the snow on the slope of Dead Mountain. But what's truly bizarre is not just that the tent is empty, but how it was left. It had been slashed open from the inside, as if the occupants were desperate to escape. Inside they find all of the hikers' belongings, their boots, their winter coats, their food supplies, and their journals. Outside, they find a trail of footprints leading away from the tent and down the mountain slope. A trail of footprints left by people who were either barefoot or wearing only socks. The footprints lead to a nearby forest, where the first 2 bodies are discovered near the remains of a small fire. They are Yuri Krivonichenko and Yuri Doroshenko, and they are found in what can only be described as a state of extreme distress. They are only in their underwear, and their bodies are severely bruised, with one of them showing signs of internal bleeding. The search continues, and a little further up the slope, they find the bodies of Igor Dyatlov and 2 others, also without their winter clothing, their bodies showing defensive wounds, as if they were trying to fight off an unknown assailant. It would be months before the remaining 4 bodies were found, buried under a thick layer of snow in a ravine. And what was found on these last 4 bodies was even more horrifying. The last 4 hikers, including Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotarev, were found with unimaginable injuries. Lyudmila had no tongue, no eyes, and part of her jaw was missing. Semyon had no eyes and severe chest trauma. Both had their ribs completely crushed, as if by an immense, non-human force. Their clothing also showed a strange, subtle detail. It contained low levels of radiation. The initial investigation concluded that the hikers had died from hypothermia, but this explanation was full of holes. Why had they torn their way out of the tent, leaving their warm clothes behind only to die of cold? Why did some of the bodies have such severe, inexplicable injuries while others showed none? Why were some of the bodies found with evidence of radiation? The official inquest was closed quickly, citing a compelling natural force as the cause of death. But for many, this was not an answer. It was a new question. The case files were sealed and classified, and the area was cordoned off for years, fueling a firestorm of speculation and a persistent belief that something was being deliberately hidden. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged to explain what happened on that mountain. Was it a natural disaster, like a sudden avalanche that buried the tent and forced them to flee? But if so, why were the footprints leading away from the tent so neat and orderly, as if they were walking rather than running for their lives? And how could an avalanche explain the internal injuries and missing body parts? Was it a result of a conflict with the local Mansi people, who were known to be fiercely protective of their sacred land? This theory was quickly debunked, as the Mansi were known to be peaceful, and a medical examination of the bodies found no signs of a struggle with other humans. Could it have been an encounter with a Yeti, the legendary Russian version of Bigfoot? This might explain the immense force and strange injuries, but it's a leap of faith for most, and still doesn't account for all the facts. Or, as many believe, was it something more sinister? Something related to the Cold War and the arms race? The radiation on the clothing, the sealed files, the quick closure of the investigation, all of it pointed to a secret that the Soviet government did not want the world to know. One of the most compelling and chilling theories is that the hikers were caught in the middle of a secret Soviet military weapons test. The radiation on their clothes could be explained by a new type of weapon, perhaps a prototype bomb or a low-yield nuclear device. The strange, non-human injuries could have been caused by an experimental pressure wave, a kind of weapon that could crush a person's insides without leaving an external mark. This would explain why they fled the tent in a panic and why they were found without their outer clothing. It would also explain the government's swift and absolute need to cover it all up, to erase the evidence and control the narrative. The story of the Dyatlov Pass incident is a perfect example of a cover-up, where the lack of a clear, plausible explanation from the authorities only serves to deepen the mystery and solidify the belief that the truth is being deliberately hidden. It's a story that lives in the shadows, a ghostly reminder of a time when governments were willing to go to great lengths to protect their secrets, even at the cost of 9 young lives. This is a tale of secrets and shadows, and it is but the first of many we will uncover tonight. From the desolate, snow-covered slopes of the Ural Mountains, our journey now takes us across the Atlantic and into the heart of America's vast, arid landscape, to a place synonymous with secrecy and alien encounters. Roswell, New Mexico. The year is 1947, a time when the world was still recovering from the devastation of World War II, and a new wave of fascination with flying saucers was sweeping the nation. Reports of strange aerial phenomena were pouring in from all corners of the country, and the public's imagination was captured by the idea of visitors from other worlds. In this atmosphere of both wonder and unease, a seemingly innocuous press release from the Roswell Army Airfield would ignite a firestorm of controversy and become the basis for one of the most famous and enduring cover-ups in modern history. On July 8, 1947, a local newspaper, the Roswell Daily Record, published a headline that would forever be etched in the annals of UFO lore. RAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. The story, based on a press release from the Roswell Army Airfield's public relations officer, stated that a flying disc had crashed on a nearby ranch. This wasn't some isolated rumor. It was an official statement from a military base. Naturally, the news spread like wildfire, capturing the attention of a public hungry for any confirmation of the strange lights they had been seeing in the skies. For a brief shining moment, it seemed that the existence of extraterrestrial life had been officially acknowledged. But that moment was fleeting, and what followed was a stunning and swift reversal of the narrative, a classic example of a cover-up in action. Less than 24 hours later, the military held a press conference to retract its initial statement. The commander of the 8th Air Force, General Roger Ramey, displayed some wreckage to reporters, claiming that the flying disc was nothing more than a downed weather balloon. The pieces of debris he showed, consisting of rubber strips, tinfoil, and wooden sticks, looked exactly like the remnants of a high-altitude balloon. The public and the media largely accepted the explanation. The excitement died down, and the story faded from the headlines. The Roswell incident seemed to have been a simple case of mistaken identity, a misunderstanding in the early days of a new and strange phenomenon. For over 30 years, that was the accepted truth. But as the years passed, the whispers began to grow louder. In the late 1970s, a retired Air Force intelligence officer named Jesse Marcel, who had been involved in the original 1947 incident, came forward with a very different story. He claimed that the debris he had collected from the crash site was unlike anything he had ever seen. He described it as a strange metallic material that was incredibly lightweight but strong, and that it could not be cut or burned. He also said that some of the wreckage had strange hieroglyphic-like symbols on it. According to Marcel, the weather balloon story was a complete fabrication, a cover-up orchestrated by the military to hide the truth of what they had really found: a crashed alien spacecraft. His testimony reignited the public's interest in the Roswell incident and sent a new generation of investigators on a quest for the truth. As more witnesses came forward, the story grew even more complex and chilling. The owner of the ranch where the debris was found, W.W. Brazel, confirmed Marcel's story, saying that the material was unlike anything he had ever seen before. He also mentioned finding other things at the crash site, things the public never saw. And then there were the stories of the bodies. Witnesses, including some who claimed to have worked at the base and in the mortuary, began to speak of seeing strange non-human bodies recovered from the crash site. Small, frail-looking beings with large heads and dark eyes, what we would now think of as the classic grey aliens. These accounts were, of course, unofficial and unverifiable, but they painted a picture of a massive, coordinated effort to not only hide the physical wreckage of the craft, but to also conceal the remains of its occupants. In 1994, under pressure from public interest and a congressional inquiry, the U.S. Air Force released a new report on the incident, attempting to put the matter to rest once and for all. This new explanation claimed that the debris was not from a conventional weather balloon, but from a top-secret government project called Project Mogul. This project was designed to use high-altitude balloons to monitor Soviet nuclear tests. The Air Force argued that the strange materials described by Marcel were simply components of the Project Mogul balloon, and that the strange hieroglyphic-like symbols were part of the balloon's radar reflectors. They even had a new explanation for the bodies. A second report was released in 1997, claiming that the alien bodies were actually crash test dummies used in high-altitude parachute tests, and that witnesses had simply confused the dummies for alien beings due to the passage of time and the suggestibility of memory. But for many, these new explanations, coming so many years after the initial incident, only deepened the suspicion that a cover-up had been taking place. Why had the Air Force waited so long to reveal the existence of Project Mogul? Why had they not used this perfectly logical explanation in 1947? And how could seasoned military and civilian witnesses have confused a radar reflector with strange symbols, or crashed test dummies with alien corpses? The story of Roswell is a perfect example of a mystery that is fueled not only by the strangeness of the initial event, but by the inconsistencies and contradictions of the official response. It's a story that has now taken on a life of its own, becoming a cornerstone of modern conspiracy theory and a powerful symbol of the public's distrust of authority. The government's actions, both in 1947 and in the decades that followed, seem to confirm, rather than deny, the idea that something extraordinary happened in the New Mexico desert. Whether it was a top-secret military experiment or a visitation from another world, the truth of what happened at Roswell remains buried under layers of secrecy and official denials, a secret that continues to fascinate and haunt us to this day. We continue our descent into the shadowy annals of history, moving from the desert of New Mexico to a very different kind of terrain, the grassy knoll of Dallas, Texas. The date is November 22nd, 1963, a day that began with a parade and ended with a nation in mourning. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy is not just a historical event. It is a cultural landmark, a moment frozen in time that changed America forever. But beneath the well-known tragedy lies a story of confusion, conflicting evidence, and a deep-seated belief that the official explanation is not the full truth. The Warren Commission, established to investigate the assassination, concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, firing 3 shots from the Texas School Book Depository. This is the official story, the one taught in schools and repeated in history books. Yet for millions, it's a story that has always felt hollow, a flimsy veil over a more complex and sinister reality. The first crack in the official narrative appears almost immediately, with the sheer volume of eyewitness accounts that contradict the Warren Commission's findings. On the day of the assassination, numerous people present in Dealey Plaza reported hearing shots coming from a direction other than the book depository, specifically from the grassy knoll to the right of the motorcade. These weren't isolated reports from a single individual. They were coming from a crowd of people, including law enforcement officers. Abraham Zapruder, a bystander who was filming the motorcade, captured a pivotal moment in his now famous film, the president's head snapping violently to the back and left, a motion that many ballistics experts argue is consistent with a shot fired from the front, from the grassy knoll, not from the rear where Oswald was supposedly located. This single piece of visual evidence has been debated and analyzed for decades, becoming a central pillar of the argument for a conspiracy. The next major pillar of suspicion revolves around the so-called magic bullet, or Commission Exhibit 399. According to the Warren Commission's report, a single bullet, fired by Oswald, passed through President Kennedy's back and neck, exited his throat, and then went on to strike Texas Governor John Connally, who was seated in front of Kennedy. The bullet, the report claimed, inflicted 7 wounds and was later found on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital, nearly pristine, with hardly any deformation. The idea that a single bullet could travel through so many layers of flesh and bone, change direction, and emerge in such a condition struck many as preposterous. Critics of the official story point to this as a clear sign of a narrative being forced to fit the evidence rather than the other way around. They argue that the sheer implausibility of the magic bullet theory is strong evidence that more than one shooter was involved, and that the official report was a cover-up designed to obscure the truth. Then there is the perplexing case of Lee Harvey Oswald himself. The official story paints him as a disgruntled loner, a former Marine with a history of political extremism. But Oswald's life and death are a labyrinth of unanswered questions. He was a man who had defected to the Soviet Union and then been allowed to return, a strange path for a man who would later be accused of assassinating the president. His own death, shot live on national television by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby just 2 days after the assassination, only deepened the mystery. Why was Ruby, who had known ties to organized crime, able to get so close to Oswald? Was his act a desperate attempt to silence Oswald before he could reveal the names of his co-conspirators? The swift and public killing of the prime suspect, before he could stand trial and be questioned, felt to many like the ultimate act of a cover-up, a convenient way to ensure the full story would never be told. The evidence for a cover-up extends even further into the very way the investigation was conducted. Key witnesses were not interviewed or their testimony was ignored. Files were sealed for decades, and many who were close to the investigation, from Secret Service agents to doctors who treated the president, later expressed their doubts about the official findings. Dr. Charles Crenshaw, one of the physicians at Parkland Hospital, publicly stated that the wounds he saw on Kennedy's body were inconsistent with a single shooter from the rear. He described an exit wound in the back of the president's head, which would have been an entrance wound if the bullet had come from the front. This kind of first-hand, professional testimony, when it contradicted the official narrative, was often dismissed or discredited. The story of the Kennedy assassination is, at its heart, a story of an official report that many people simply refuse to believe because the narrative it presents is riddled with holes and inconsistencies. The motivations for such a cover-up are as varied as the conspiracy theories themselves. Was it a plot by the CIA, unhappy with Kennedy's handling of the Bay of Pigs invasion and his plans to dismantle the agency? Was it organized crime, seeking revenge for the Attorney General Robert Kennedy's crackdown on the mafia? Was it a plot by anti-Castro Cuban exiles, or even by elements within the military-industrial complex who feared Kennedy's plans to pull troops out of Vietnam? The lack of a clear single culprit for the conspiracy is perhaps what makes the story so persistent and so fascinating. It allows people to project their own suspicions and fears onto the events of that day. The assassination of JFK stands as one of history's most profound and successful cover-ups, not because it was able to convince everyone, but because the official story was so flawed that it forced millions to believe that a deeper, more sinister truth must exist. It is a story that reminds us that sometimes the most profound secrets are hidden in plain sight, obscured not by a lack of evidence, but by an overwhelming abundance of it, all pointing in different directions, all leading to a conclusion that feels wrong in our bones. Our descent into the world of historical cover-ups now takes us to the heart of the Cold War, and a story that sounds like it was ripped from the pages of a spy novel. We're heading back to the Soviet Union, but this time, the secret is not about a hidden military test, but about a catastrophic nuclear disaster that was deliberately and systematically erased from public memory. The event is known as the Kishtim disaster, and it is a name that very few people outside of a specific field of study have ever heard. This is because for over 30 years, the Soviet government went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that this event, which released more radiation than the Chernobyl disaster, simply never happened in the eyes of the world. The story begins in the closed, secret city of Chelyabinsk 40, a place so secret it didn't even appear on maps. Located in the Ural Mountains, this was one of the Soviet Union's most important nuclear weapons facilities. It was here, in a massive plutonium production complex, that the Soviet Union was racing to build its atomic arsenal. On September 29, 1957, a cooling system in a tank containing highly radioactive liquid waste failed. The tank, which held up to 80 tons of waste, was sealed and not properly monitored. The temperature inside began to rise, and a chain reaction of chemical explosions occurred. The resulting blast, with a force equivalent to dozens of tons of TNT, launched a plume of highly radioactive material over a vast area, contaminating over 20,000 square kilometers and affecting hundreds of thousands of people. The immediate aftermath was chaos. A pillar of orange and red smoke rose into the sky, visible for miles. But in the Soviet Union, there was no press to report on it, no public outcry. Instead, there was silence. The government's first response was not to inform the public, but to contain the information. The area was cordoned off, and the nearby town of Ozyorsk, which was home to the plant's workers, was evacuated. But for the hundreds of thousands of people living downwind of the plant, the truth was kept from them. They were told nothing. They saw the strange discolored leaves on the trees, the sudden death of their livestock, and the mysterious illnesses that began to afflict their families, but they had no idea why. Some were simply told to evacuate with no explanation, leaving their homes and belongings behind. It was a mass displacement cloaked in secrecy, a lie told to protect the government's image and its nuclear program. The cover-up was meticulous. For decades, the Soviet government denied that any such incident had occurred. The contaminated area was designated as a nature reserve, a clever way to keep people out without arousing suspicion. Scientists and medical professionals who worked with the affected population were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements. No public health warnings were issued. The victims of radiation sickness were simply told they had special illnesses and were treated in secret hospitals. The truth was buried under mountains of red tape and official denial. The world had no idea that a disaster of this magnitude had taken place. It was as if the lives and the land had been wiped from existence. A cover-up so complete it was a form of historical annihilation. The first hint of the disaster came from the West, not from within the Soviet Union. In 1976, Soviet dissident and biologist Boris Medvedev published a paper in a Western journal detailing what he had pieced together about the accident. He had noticed strange reports of a natural disaster in the Urals, and had read scientific papers from the region that mentioned unusual levels of radiation. His work was largely dismissed as Cold War propaganda by many in the West, but it planted the seed of a story that would not die. The full truth of the Kishtim disaster did not become public until 1989, when the Soviet Union, under the new policies of openness or glasnost, finally admitted that the accident had occurred. By that time, over 30 years had passed. The people who had lived through it had suffered in silence, their stories unheard, their illnesses untreated, their lives irreversibly altered by a secret that was not their own to keep. The Kishtim disaster is a sobering example of a cover-up on a grand scale. It wasn't about a single event or a lone actor. It was about an entire society conspiring to hide a devastating reality. It shows us how a government, with absolute control over information, can rewrite history and deny the existence of a tragedy that affected hundreds of thousands of people. The victims were not just those who suffered from radiation poisoning. They were also the people who were denied the truth about their own lives and the dangers they faced. The legacy of the Kishtim disaster is not just the contaminated land, but the silent question of how many other secrets were buried under the iron fist of a totalitarian regime. From the invisible tragedy of Kishtim, we now travel to a place that represents the height of human technological achievement and the depths of a government's desire to control the narrative. The date is January 28, 1986, and the world is watching, live on television, as the Space Shuttle Challenger lifts off from Cape Canaveral, Florida. It is a moment of national pride, a testament to American ingenuity. On board is Krista McAuliffe, a high school teacher who was selected as the first civilian in space. Her presence on the mission and the live broadcast to classrooms across the country made the flight a symbol of hope and a powerful teaching moment for a new generation. But just 73 seconds after launch, that hope was shattered. The Challenger broke apart in a fiery explosion, a catastrophic failure witnessed by millions. The nation was in shock. 7 astronauts had lost their lives. The immediate question was not if something went wrong, but what went wrong, and why. While the initial event was public, the subsequent investigation and the revelations that followed became a textbook case of a cover-up, not of the event itself, but of the prior knowledge that could have prevented it. The official investigation, led by the Presidential Commission on the Space Shuttle Challenger accident, quickly began to uncover a dark truth that NASA had tried to keep buried. The commission, led by former Secretary of State William P. Rogers, soon learned that the cause of the disaster was a failure of the O-ring seals on the right solid rocket booster. These 2 rubber-like rings, designed to seal the joints of the rocket, had failed to do their job, allowing hot gases to escape and burn a hole through the external fuel tank. But the most damning discovery was not the mechanical failure itself, but the fact that NASA engineers had known about the problem for years. Long before the Challenger tragedy, there had been warnings, concerns, and a history of erosion in the O-rings from previous flights. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the solid rocket boosters, had repeatedly warned NASA of the dangers, especially in cold weather, which was a factor on the morning of the launch. The cover-up in this case wasn't about hiding the fact of the explosion. It was about hiding the fact that the explosion was preventable and that NASA had ignored its own experts. The engineers at Thiokol had even held a last-minute teleconference the night before the launch, desperately arguing to postpone the mission. They presented data showing the O-ring's vulnerability at temperatures below 53 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature on the morning of the launch was 36 degrees. But NASA managers, under pressure to meet a strict launch schedule and eager to get the mission underway, overruled the engineers' warnings. They were told to take off their engineering hats and put on their management hats. The engineers were essentially silenced, and the mission went ahead with a known catastrophic flaw. The cover-up came to light during the Rogers Commission's hearings. One of the most powerful and unforgettable moments was when physicist Richard Feynman, a member of the commission, demonstrated the failure of the O-rings live on television. Using a simple clamp and a glass of ice water, he showed how a piece of the O-ring material lost its resilience and became brittle in the cold. This simple, elegant experiment cut through all the complex jargon and bureaucratic doublespeak, showing the world that the failure was not a mystery, but a direct consequence of a decision to ignore a clear warning. It was a moment of profound revelation, proving that the tragedy could have been avoided. The Challenger disaster cover-up is a different kind of secrecy. It's not a conspiracy to hide an alien spacecraft or an assassination plot. Instead, it's a cover-up of gross negligence and a flawed institutional culture that prioritizes schedules and public relations over safety. It's a story of a large organization burying dissenting opinions and silencing its own experts. The legacy of this cover-up is a powerful lesson in accountability and transparency. It reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones hidden in plain sight, in memos and reports that are dismissed or ignored. The Challenger explosion was a tragedy for the 7 astronauts, but the subsequent cover-up was a tragedy for the public's trust in its institutions. The truth in this case was not some grand conspiracy, but a simple and painful reality. The people in charge knew the risks and chose to take them anyway. From the cold, bureaucratic cover-up of the Challenger disaster, we now turn our attention to one of the most enigmatic and deeply unsettling mysteries of the 20th century, a story that blends Cold War intrigue with a persistent sense of the surreal. The place is the Tunguska River in Siberia, Russia. The date is June 30th, 1908. At around 7:17 a.m. local time, an immense explosion, estimated to be more powerful than 1,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs, rocked the remote Siberian forest. The blast flattened over 2,000 square kilometers of trees, an area larger than London, and was heard for hundreds of kilometers. Yet despite the immense power of the event, no crater was ever found. This is the Tunguska event, and the story of its cover-up, or more accurately, its neglect and subsequent misdirection, is as strange as the event itself. For years after the explosion, the Russian government showed little interest in investigating what had happened. This was a time of political turmoil in Russia, with the Tsarist regime on its last legs, followed by the chaos of the First World War and the Russian Revolution. A remote Siberian forest was the least of anyone's concerns. It wasn't until 1927, nearly 2 decades after the event, that the first scientific expedition, led by Soviet mineralogist Leonid Kulik, was finally sent to the site. What Kulik and his team found was bizarre. The blast had left a pattern of flattened trees extending radially outwards from a central point, but at the epicenter, the trees were still standing, their branches stripped bare like a forest of telephone poles. This was the exact opposite of what you'd expect from a meteoroid impact, which would have left a crater with the trees flattened outwards from it. And most importantly, there was no crater. The lack of an impact crater, combined with the standing trees at the epicenter, led to a cascade of scientific theories that grew increasingly unconventional. The most widely accepted explanation is that the explosion was caused by a large asteroid or comet fragment that detonated in the air a few miles above the ground, an event known as an airburst. This would explain the lack of a crater and the radial pattern of destruction. The immense heat and pressure from the airburst would have flattened the trees without leaving a physical scar on the Earth's surface. However, this scientific consensus has never fully satisfied the public, and the long period of official neglect, followed by the strange nature of the findings, has fueled a cottage industry of conspiracy theories. The cover-up, in this instance, wasn't an active concealment of a government secret, but rather a passive one, born from a lack of interest and a lack of resources. But as the Cold War began and a renewed interest in military technology and the supernatural took hold, the Tunguska event began to be viewed through a new, more conspiratorial lens. What if the Tunguska event wasn't a natural phenomenon at all? What if it was a secret weapons test? Some have suggested it was the first test of an atomic weapon, even though this predates the Manhattan Project by decades. Others have speculated about more advanced and more sinister technologies. The most popular and enduring conspiracy theory, however, links the Tunguska event to something non-human. The alien spacecraft theory, first popularized in the 1960s, suggests that the explosion was caused by a crashing alien spaceship, or perhaps the detonation of its propulsion system. Proponents of this theory point to the lack of a crater, the strange pattern of flattened trees, and the alleged eyewitness accounts of a bright light in the sky, followed by a massive explosion. Some have even claimed that the Soviet government, upon realizing the extraterrestrial nature of the event, quickly classified all information and created a fake narrative of a meteoroid airburst to hide the truth. While there is no credible evidence to support this claim, the very act of the government's initial neglect and subsequent scientific misdirection gave birth to the suspicion that something was being hidden. The official story of an airburst, while scientifically sound, feels too simple to many people, especially given the otherworldly scale and strangeness of the event. The Tunguska event stands as a testament to the power of a void in information. When a government fails to provide a clear and timely answer, the public will fill that void with the most fantastic and imaginative explanations they can. The cover-up of Tunguska is a cover-up by absence, a historical blank space that continues to invite speculation and mystery. It reminds us that sometimes the most enduring secrets are not the ones that are actively hidden, but the ones that are left unexplained. From the unexplained blast in the Siberian wilderness, we now move to a much more recent and technologically driven mystery that has captivated the attention of millions. We're heading to the dark, digital underbelly of the internet, where a secret is rumored to be hiding in plain sight. A secret so vast that it has a name: the Snowden revelations. But this is not the story of what Edward Snowden revealed. It is the story of a far grander, and some would argue, more insidious secret that his revelations only hinted at. This is the story of a global surveillance network, a vast and silent machine that is always listening, always watching, a secret so immense that it is almost impossible to comprehend. The year is 2013, and the world is still reeling from the aftermath of the September 11th attacks, a tragedy that forever changed the balance between security and privacy. In this climate of heightened fear and a renewed focus on counterterrorism, a former CIA employee and National Security Agency contractor, Edward Snowden, began to leak classified documents to journalists. The documents he revealed were not about a single event, but about a system, a network of programs that allowed the US government to conduct mass surveillance on a scale that was previously unimaginable. The program known as PRISM, for example, collected data directly from the servers of major technology companies like Google, Apple, and Microsoft. Another program, XKeyscore, allowed analysts to search through vast databases of internet data, including emails, online chats, and browsing history. The scope of these programs was breathtaking and alarming. The cover-up here is not a single act of deception, but a slow, deliberate process of institutional obfuscation and denial. For years, government officials had been asked directly about the existence of these programs, and they had consistently and sometimes publicly lied. James Clapper, the director of national intelligence at the time, was asked by a senator if the NSA collected any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans. His response was a clear and unequivocal no. It was a lie, and a public one, exposed as such just a few months later by Snowden's leaks. This kind of public deception, at the highest levels of government, is what makes the Snowden revelations so much more than a simple leak of classified information. It was an exposure of a systemic culture of secrecy and a deliberate effort to mislead the public about the true extent of the government's power. But Snowden's revelations also hinted at an even deeper secret, one that goes beyond the collection of phone records and emails. They hinted at a global system of surveillance that operates in a legal and ethical gray area, a world of backdoors, encrypted communications, and the quiet manipulation of public perception. The documents he leaked and the stories that followed created a kind of digital folklore, a new kind of conspiracy theory for the 21st century. The whispers grew louder. What if the NSA had access to every digital communication, every financial transaction, every search query? What if they were not just collecting data on terrorists, but on anyone, anywhere, for any reason? The scale of the technology and the government's willingness to lie about it made these questions feel less like paranoid fantasies and more like legitimate concerns. The cover-up of global surveillance is not about hiding a specific event like a crash or an assassination. It is a cover-up of a capability. It's a cover-up of the fact that the tools exist, that the power to use them has been amassed, and that the public has been deliberately kept in the dark about it. The government's justification has always been national security. But as the Snowden documents showed, the surveillance was often indiscriminate and went far beyond the scope of a legitimate threat. The true secret was not the data itself, but the fact that the government had the ability to collect it on a global scale, without oversight and without public knowledge. The Snowden revelations were like a small flashlight beam in a cavernous room, illuminating just a fraction of the immense silent architecture of a global surveillance state. This story serves as a chilling reminder that in the modern world, cover-ups are not just about hiding physical objects or historical events. They can be about hiding the very infrastructure of power itself. The secret is no longer a physical thing, but a digital one. The lie is not a simple denial, but a complex web of legal loopholes, classified programs, and a culture of secrecy that is woven into the very fabric of government. The legacy of the Snowden revelations is a profound and lasting distrust of authority in the digital age. It is the understanding that a secret can be everywhere at once, in every email, in every text message, and in every file, and that the most effective cover-up is often the one that tells you nothing is happening, even as it watches your every move. Leaving the modern world of digital secrets behind, we now journey back to a time of medical experimentation and ethical malpractice. Our destination is rural Alabama, and the subject is one of the most shameful and prolonged cover-ups in American history, the Tuskegee syphilis study. This isn't a story of a sudden event that was hidden, but of a long, slow-burning tragedy that was allowed to continue for decades, all in the name of a scientific experiment. It is a story that reveals the horrifying depths to which a government and its medical community can sink when they dehumanize a population and choose to lie to them in the most fundamental way. The year is 1932 in Macon County, Alabama. The U.S. Public Health Service, in collaboration with the Tuskegee Institute, begins a study on syphilis. Their stated purpose is to track the progression of the disease in black men. The study enrolls 600 men, 399 of whom have syphilis and 201 who do not. The men with the disease are told they are being treated for bad blood, a local term for various ailments. They are offered free medical exams, meals, and burial insurance. But the terrible secret, the central lie of the entire study, is that they are not being treated at all. They are being observed. Their suffering and decline documented, as the disease slowly and irreversibly ravages their bodies. The cover-up in this case was not a single decisive act, but a continuous and pervasive deception that lasted for 40 years. For 4 decades, the U.S. government lied to these men and their families. They were told they were receiving care, when in fact, they were being denied it. The most egregious part of this lie came in the 1940s, when penicillin was discovered and became the standard effective treatment for syphilis. Instead of giving the men this life-saving drug, the researchers continued to withhold it. They did not inform the men that a cure was available. They actively worked to prevent them from receiving treatment, going so far as to coordinate with local health services to ensure the men in the study were not included in public health initiatives to combat syphilis. The men were literally dying from a treatable disease, and the government was watching it happen, meticulously recording their suffering. The study continued through 5 U.S. presidencies and multiple generations of doctors and scientists. It was an open secret within the medical community. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, a number of doctors and scientists raised concerns about the study, arguing that it was unethical to withhold treatment, but their warnings were ignored. The study's directors, convinced of its scientific value, simply kept going. They argued that the damage to the men's health had already been done, and that it was better to see the study through to its conclusion. This reveals a chillingly bureaucratic form of cover-up, where the initial lie creates a momentum that is almost impossible to stop. The focus shifted from the well-being of the men to the integrity of the data. The truth finally came to light in 1972, when a whistleblower, a public health service employee named Peter Buxton, leaked information about the study to a reporter. The story, published on the front page of the New York Times, ignited a national firestorm. The public was horrified. A Senate hearing was convened, and the study was finally and officially terminated. By this point, only a handful of the original men were still alive. The legacy of the Tuskegee syphilis study is not just the physical suffering of its victims, but the lasting damage it did to the trust between the public, especially the black community, and the American medical system. It is a profound and lasting example of how a cover-up can be built, not on the concealment of a single crime, but on the systematic and long-term denial of basic human rights. It is a story that proves that sometimes the most horrific secrets are not hidden in the dark, but in plain sight, disguised as a noble pursuit of knowledge. From the quiet, prolonged horrors of medical deception and the systematic denial of human dignity, we now turn to a secret that fueled the fire of war, a cover-up of a single violent act that plunged two nations into conflict. The year is 1898. The setting is the bustling, politically charged harbor of Havana, Cuba, a land seething with rebellion against its Spanish colonial rulers. For months, tensions between the United States and Spain had been escalating. American newspapers, led by powerful publishers like William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, engaged in what became known as yellow journalism, sensationalizing the Spanish atrocities against the Cuban people and stirring up a powerful wave of public sympathy and outrage. The air was thick with patriotic fervor, and the drums of war were already beating a low, menacing rhythm. In this volatile atmosphere, the USS Maine, an American naval battleship, was dispatched to Havana. The official reason for its presence was a friendly visit, a show of good faith and a way to protect American interest in Cuba. But everyone knew the ship's arrival was a thinly veiled act of intimidation, a powerful symbol of American might anchored directly in the face of a nervous and defiant Spain. It was a dangerous game of diplomatic poker, with each side pushing the other closer to the brink. For 3 weeks the Maine sat at its mooring, a source of constant tension, a steel dragon in a powder keg. Then, on the night of February 15th, at precisely 9:40 p.m., a deafening explosion ripped through the ship. A massive flash of light illuminated the harbor, followed by a thunderous roar that echoed across the water. The forward section of the USS Maine was completely destroyed, twisted metal and debris hurtling into the sky. Within minutes, the ship began to sink, taking with it 260 of its crew members. The tragedy was swift and horrific. The immediate aftermath was a scene of chaos and heroism, with sailors scrambling to save their comrades. But for the majority of the crew, their fate was sealed in that fiery moment. The news of the explosion was telegraphed to the United States and spread with the speed of a shockwave. It was an event tailor-made for the sensationalist headlines of the day. The newspapers, already primed for conflict, wasted no time. Without any evidence, they immediately blamed Spain. "Remember the Maine! To hell with Spain!" became the rallying cry. It was printed on the front pages, shouted in the streets, and repeated by politicians. The public, already inflamed by stories of Spanish brutality, was now convinced of a final, unprovoked act of aggression. The cry for war was no longer a low drumbeat. It was a furious, deafening roar. But what was the truth? Did Spain actually plant a mine? The Spanish government vehemently denied any involvement and even offered to have a joint investigation. But their offer was rejected by the United States. An official U.S. Naval Board of Inquiry was convened immediately, and it concluded, after a month of investigation, that the Maine had been sunk by an external explosion, a mine. The report was concise and clear. It provided the U.S. government with the official reason it needed to declare war. On April 25, 1898, the United States formally went to war with Spain, a conflict sparked by a single, catastrophic event. The cover-up here is not about hiding the fact that the ship was sunk. The sinking was seen by everyone. The secret lies in the manipulation of the truth about how it was sunk. From the very beginning, there were those who believed the official story was a convenient fabrication. Naval experts, even at the time, pointed out inconsistencies in the report. They argued that a mine would have created a massive geyser of water and a different type of blast pattern. They suggested that the most likely cause was an internal explosion. The coal used to power the ship was a low-grade bituminous variety, known to be highly volatile and prone to spontaneous combustion when stored in confined, hot spaces. A fire in one of the ship's coal bunkers, they reasoned, could have easily ignited the adjacent ammunition magazines, leading to the devastating explosion. This was the inconvenient truth, a truth that would have stripped the US of its moral high ground and its justification for war. The suspicion of a cover-up was so persistent that decades later, the US government was forced to re-examine the case. In 1911, the wreck of the Maine was raised from the harbor, and a second board of inquiry was convened. This investigation confirmed the findings of the first one, but the very act of raising the ship and re-examining the evidence only served to fuel further suspicion that the truth was being protected. However, it wasn't until 1976 that the most compelling re-evaluation of the event was conducted. A team of naval investigators, led by Admiral Hyman Rickover, a legendary figure known for his rigorous scientific approach, used modern forensics and engineering analysis to re-examine the original data and photographic evidence. Rickover's team came to a very different conclusion. They determined that the most likely cause of the explosion was, indeed, an internal one. The evidence, they argued, overwhelmingly pointed to a coal dust fire igniting the munitions. The exterior plates of the ship, which would have been warped outwards by an internal explosion, were bent inward on the forward section, a detail that was either ignored or misinterpreted by the first board of inquiry. The cover-up, it seemed, was not a secret of what was done, but a secret of what was known. The official investigation in 1898 was less about finding the truth and more about confirming a predetermined narrative. The evidence that pointed to an internal explosion was simply discarded or misinterpreted, and the truth was buried under the convenient and politically advantageous lie of an external attack. The sinking of the USS Maine stands as a powerful testament to how a nation can use a tragedy to justify its actions. It reminds us that sometimes the most effective cover-ups are not about erasing an event from history, but about controlling the narrative around it. The official story of the USS Maine, that it was a victim of Spanish treachery, was a cover-up that successfully led to a war, changed the course of American foreign policy, and turned a tragedy into a weapon. It is a story that proves that the truth can sometimes be the first casualty of conflict, and that in the rush to war, a convenient lie can be far more powerful than the most inconvenient truth. It is a secret that has now been revealed, but its historical impact and the war it helped to ignite remains a chilling and permanent part of our collective memory. From the fabricated truth of a naval tragedy, we now journey to the very heart of American political power, to a cover-up that was not about justifying a war, but about hiding a crime. Our destination is Washington, D.C., in the early 1970s, a time of deep political divisions, a time when the Vietnam War was tearing the country apart, and a powerful presidency under Richard Nixon was seeking to consolidate its power at any cost. This is the story of the Watergate scandal, a chain of events that began with a third-rate burglary and ended with the resignation of a president, all because of a cover-up that unraveled, piece by painful piece, for the entire world to see. The story begins on a warm night, June 17, 1972, with a handful of men dressed in suits and rubber gloves, caught red-handed inside the Democratic National Committee's headquarters at the Watergate office complex. They were not common thieves. They were former CIA operatives and anti-Castro Cuban exiles, and they were caught trying to bug the office. The initial reaction from the Nixon administration and the committee to re-elect the president, known by the unfortunate acronym CREEP, was one of dismissal. They claimed no knowledge of the break-in and insisted it was an isolated incident. This was the first and perhaps most crucial lie of the cover-up. They believed that a quick denial and a few bribes would be enough to make the story disappear. But they had underestimated the persistence of two young reporters at the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. While the rest of the media largely accepted the official story, Woodward and Bernstein began to dig. Their investigation was a masterclass in relentless journalism. They followed the money, tracing the funds used to pay the burglars back to a secret slush fund for the Nixon campaign. They spoke to sources, sometimes in secret, late-night meetings in parking garages. One of these sources, a high-ranking government official whose identity would remain a secret for decades, was known only by the codename Deep Throat. This source provided crucial guidance, telling the reporters to follow the money, and confirming key details that allowed them to connect the seemingly isolated burglary to the very highest levels of the White House. The cover-up grew more complex as the investigation expanded. Hushed phone calls, secret meetings, and a systemic effort to obstruct justice began to come to light. The White House ordered the CIA to block the FBI's investigation into the break-in. Key figures in the administration, including Nixon's closest aides, John Ehrlichman and H.R. Haldeman, were directly involved in a conspiracy to pay the burglars hush money and to lie to investigators. The lie was simple. We knew nothing. We had no involvement. But the truth was a tangled web of lies, and the more they tried to cover it up, the more they had to lie, and the more people became involved, making the conspiracy increasingly difficult to contain. The unraveling of the cover-up reached a critical turning point when it was revealed that President Nixon had a secret taping system in the Oval Office. This was the smoking gun that changed everything. The tapes were not just evidence, they were the truth itself, recorded by the very person who was trying to hide it. The existence of the tapes set off a firestorm of legal and political battles. The Supreme Court, in a landmark case, ruled that Nixon had to hand over the tapes to the special prosecutor. This was a direct blow to the presidential claim of executive privilege, and it was a moment that showed that in America no one, not even the president, is above the law. When the tapes were finally released, they revealed the chilling and undeniable truth. The conversations showed that Nixon was directly involved in the cover-up from the beginning. In one of the most famous tapes, he can be heard discussing a plan to have the CIA tell the FBI to stay out of the investigation. It was proof of obstruction of justice, and it was the end of his presidency. The release of the tapes destroyed Nixon's political support. He had lied to the American people, to the media, and to Congress. He had used his power not to serve the country, but to protect himself and his inner circle. Faced with certain impeachment by the House of Representatives and conviction by the Senate, Richard Nixon resigned on August 9, 1974, the only U.S. president to ever do so. The Watergate scandal is a powerful and enduring lesson about the nature of a political cover-up. It was not about hiding a single spectacular event, but about a systematic and long-term effort to hide a crime and an abuse of power. It shows how the attempt to conceal the truth can be more damning than the initial crime itself. The cover-up was built on a foundation of lies and a belief that power could protect the guilty, but it was ultimately brought down by the relentless pursuit of a free press and the integrity of the American legal system. The story of Watergate is a classic example of a cover-up that failed, and in its failure, it provided a cautionary tale for all who seek to hide the truth for the sake of power. It serves as a reminder that even the most powerful of secrets can be exposed, and that the truth, when pursued with courage and determination, will always find a way to come to light. From the corridors of political power and the unraveling lies of Watergate, we now drift into the silent, watchful expanse of the South Atlantic, a place where a flash of light, seen only by an orbiting satellite, may have changed the course of history. The year is 1979, a time when the world was gripped by the final throes of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a delicate dance of nuclear diplomacy, bound by treaties like the Partial Test Ban Treaty, which prohibited nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere, underwater, and in outer space. The global effort was to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons, to ensure that only a few major powers held the keys to such apocalyptic power. But on the morning of September 22nd, in a remote stretch of ocean between the tip of South Africa and Antarctica, a secret was born in an instant of blinding light. The light was a double flash, detected by a U.S. government satellite named Vela 69111. The Vela satellites were part of a secret surveillance program designed to monitor for clandestine nuclear detonations. They were equipped with sensors that could detect the unique two-part flash signature of a nuclear explosion, an extremely bright, short flash of light followed by a second, slightly dimmer flash. This is the telltale sign of a nuclear blast in the atmosphere, as the initial burst of energy ionizes the air, which then re-emits a second, longer-lasting pulse of light. The satellite's sensors picked up this unmistakable signature, and the data was sent back to the United States. The intelligence community was immediately thrown into a state of panic and confusion. A nuclear test had occurred, but where? And more importantly, who was responsible? The coordinates pointed to a remote area of the South Atlantic, and the evidence was compelling. But for the administration of President Jimmy Carter, the political implications were enormous. The number one suspect, based on the location and other intelligence, was a joint test conducted by two of America's key, albeit controversial allies, apartheid-era South Africa and Israel. At the time, Israel was widely suspected of having a secret nuclear program, and South Africa's nuclear ambitions were well known. A public admission that these two nations had defied the global non-proliferation movement would have created an international crisis. The US would have been obligated to impose sanctions on its allies, a move that would have severely damaged its diplomatic relations and created a political firestorm at home. And so, the cover-up began. The government's response was not to reveal the truth, but to cast doubt on it. A panel of scientists, known as the Ad Hoc Panel, was created to investigate the event. The panel was officially tasked with determining if the double flash was indeed a nuclear explosion. But from the very beginning, there were strong indications that the panel's true purpose was to provide a plausible, non-nuclear explanation that the government could use to dismiss the event. The panel's final report, released in 1980, concluded that the double flash was likely not a nuclear blast, but a zodiac event, a meteoroid hitting the satellite, or some other unexplained technical glitch. The report was filled with technical jargon and qualifications, but its ultimate message was clear. There was nothing to see here. The incident was largely swept under the rug and forgotten by the public. But the cover-up was not a complete success. Many scientists who were on the panel and many intelligence officials publicly and privately disagreed with the official conclusion. A White House science advisor at the time, Frank Press, expressed his skepticism, stating that the event was almost certainly a nuclear explosion. The evidence from the Vela satellite was corroborated by other sensors, including a listening station in Puerto Rico that had picked up a distinctive acoustic wave in the water, a common byproduct of a nuclear detonation. Years later, declassified documents from the CIA and other agencies would reveal that the US government had, in fact, been tracking the nuclear collaboration between South Africa and Israel for years. The evidence was all there, but it was conveniently ignored to serve a political purpose. The cover-up of the Vela incident is a chilling example of a diplomatic secret. It wasn't about hiding a single criminal act, like in Watergate, or a tragic accident like the USS Maine. It was about hiding a geopolitical reality that was too inconvenient to confront. The US government chose to lie to the American people and the world. in order to avoid a confrontation with two of its allies. In doing so, it effectively gave them a green light to continue their nuclear programs in secret. The legacy of this cover-up is a silent one. It's the unspoken understanding that nuclear proliferation for some nations is a secret that the world is willing to keep as long as it's kept quiet. The Vela incident remains a ghost in the annals of history, a silent flash that was officially nothing, but in truth was a powerful testament to a government's willingness to prioritize political expediency over truth. From the silent flash of a hidden nuclear test in the vast, empty ocean, we turn now to the very public, very loud roar of a failed invasion on the shores of Cuba. The year is 1961, and the Cold War is at a fever pitch. The young, charismatic President John F. Kennedy has just taken office, and he inherits a grave and immediate foreign policy challenge just 90 miles from American soil. Fidel Castro's communist revolution in Cuba has succeeded, and he has aligned his nation with the Soviet Union, creating what the US government viewed as a dangerous and unacceptable outpost of Soviet influence in the Western Hemisphere. The US government felt a profound and urgent need to remove Castro from power. The secret plan to do so was already in motion. It was conceived and developed by the CIA under the previous Eisenhower administration, a classic covert operation designed to use a proxy force to achieve a geopolitical goal without direct, overt US military involvement. The plan was codenamed Operation Pluto, and its goal was to train a force of Cuban exiles, arm them, and land them on the island to spark a popular uprising against Castro's regime. The idea was that once the exiles, known as Brigade 2506, landed, the Cuban people would rise up to join them, and Castro's government would collapse from within. It was a complex, high-stakes gamble built on a series of assumptions that would prove to be fatally flawed. The invasion force, composed of about 1,400 Cuban exiles, was trained in Guatemala and Nicaragua. They were a motley crew, united by a fierce hatred of Castro, but they were not a professional army. The plan hinged on surprise and the element of a popular revolt, but the CIA's intelligence was deeply flawed. They had overestimated the level of anti-Castro sentiment on the island and severely underestimated the strength and loyalty of Castro's military forces. The plan also relied on the destruction of Castro's small air force on the ground, a task assigned to a handful of B-26 bombers flown by the exiles themselves. But in the final days before the invasion, President Kennedy, wary of overt American involvement, scaled back the airstrikes. This decision, intended to maintain the illusion of non-involvement, would prove to be a fatal blow to the entire operation. The invasion began on April 17, 1961, with the landing of the exile force at a remote, swampy beach known as the Bay of Pigs. The name itself would soon become synonymous with failure. From the very beginning, everything went wrong. The planned airstrikes were a disaster, and Castro's air force, which the CIA believed to be non-existent, was able to scramble and sink two of the exiles' supply ships. The ground forces were immediately met with fierce resistance from Castro's army, which was far larger and better equipped than the CIA had anticipated. The popular uprising never materialized. The invaders were pinned down on the beach, and within 72 hours the entire force was either killed or captured. It was a catastrophic and humiliating defeat for the United States. In the immediate aftermath, the cover-up began. President Kennedy went on television and delivered a public statement, a clear and decisive lie to the American people and the world. He denied any direct U.S. involvement in the invasion. He claimed that the U.S. had provided some logistical support to the Cuban exiles, but that the operation was an entirely Cuban affair. The truth, however, was impossible to hide. The captured exiles were a living testament to American involvement, and they were paraded in front of the world's media by Castro himself. Their weapons, their uniforms, their training, all of it had US markings. The CIA's fingerprints were all over the operation. The lie, told to save face and maintain a pretense of deniability, fell apart in a matter of days. The Bay of Pigs is a different kind of cover-up from the ones we've explored. It wasn't about hiding an event or a long-term crime. It was about denying responsibility for a public, spectacular, and utterly disastrous failure. The secret was not what happened, but who was truly behind it. Kennedy's administration, caught in a trap of its own making, was forced to confront the harsh reality that its attempt at a covert operation had failed in the most public way imaginable. The attempted cover-up only compounded the embarrassment, making it clear that the US government had not only made a major strategic blunder, but had also attempted to lie about it. The legacy of the Bay of Pigs is a profound lesson in the limits of covert operations and the futility of a transparent cover-up. While Kennedy was praised for eventually taking full responsibility for the failure, the damage was done. The incident damaged America's international reputation, emboldened Castro, and left a scar on the relationship between the US military and the CIA. It stands as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are not the ones that are successfully hidden, but the ones that are so quickly and obviously exposed, leaving behind a trail of incompetence and deception that can haunt a nation for years. The Bay of Pigs was a lie told in the hopes of controlling a narrative, but it was a lie that was undone by the very truth it tried to bury. From the chaotic and failed military gambits of the Cold War, we turn now to a different kind of American secret, one that unfolded on a quiet spring evening in Memphis, a story not of a war between nations, but of a quiet battle for the soul of a nation. The year is 1968, a time of profound social and political turmoil. The civil rights movement has fundamentally changed America, but its leader, a man who spoke of peace and justice, has become a target for those who fear his message. The man is Martin Luther King Jr., and on April 4th, in a moment that would forever be etched in the collective memory of the world, he was silenced. The scene is the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. It is a humid late afternoon. King is standing on the balcony with his close associates. A shot rings out. The sound is sharp and final. Martin Luther King Jr. falls to the ground, his lifeblood spilling onto the concrete. The world is in shock. His death ignited a firestorm of riots and mourning across the country, a desperate explosion of grief and anger. The question was not if a crime had been committed, but who had committed it, and if they had acted alone. The official story would emerge quickly, a simple and convenient narrative that many, to this day, refuse to believe. The man identified as the assassin was James Earl Ray, a small-time criminal and a known racist. The police claimed that Ray, who was a fugitive from a Missouri prison, had rented a rooming house across the street from the Lorraine Motel. They found a rifle with his fingerprints on it a few blocks away. Within a matter of months, Ray was captured in London, and facing a potential death sentence, he pleaded guilty to the crime. The case was closed. The government's conclusion was definitive and simple. James Earl Ray, a lone, disgruntled racist, had killed Martin Luther King Jr. The cover-up, if there was one, was not to hide the assassination, but to hide the possibility that something far more sinister had occurred. But from the very beginning, the official story was riddled with holes and inconsistencies that created a persistent and powerful air of suspicion. First, there was the matter of the rifle itself. While it was found with Ray's fingerprints on it, the FBI's own forensics team was never able to conclusively match the bullet that killed King to that particular rifle. The bullet was too damaged. Then there was the issue of Ray's timeline. A man of his limited resources and criminal background seemed to have an almost impossible amount of financial support and a flawless escape route that led him across international borders. He had a fake passport and access to a sophisticated network that allowed him to evade a global manhunt for months. This led many to believe that Ray was not the true assassin, but a patsy, a pawn in a much larger game. The most damning evidence, however, came from the eyewitnesses at the scene itself. Many of them, including King's own associates and police officers, believed the shot had not come from the rooming house where Ray was supposedly located, but from a thick patch of bushes on the ground directly below the balcony. The police's immediate response was to search the rooming house, but they largely ignored the area of the bushes. It was a detail that pointed to a very different kind of conspiracy, one that suggested the crime scene had been compromised, and the investigation had been intentionally steered away from the true location of the shooter. For decades, the story of a lone assassin was the accepted truth, but King's own family never believed it. They were convinced that James Earl Ray was not the man who had killed their father. Their tireless search for the truth culminated in a civil trial in 1999, a case that pitted the King family against Lloyd Jowers, a Memphis restaurant owner who had publicly confessed to being part of a conspiracy to kill King. During the trial, dozens of witnesses came forward, including retired FBI agents and members of the military, who provided chilling testimony about a vast conspiracy. The jury, after only an hour of deliberation, returned a stunning verdict. They found that a conspiracy was responsible for King's death, involving Jowers, government agencies, and the mafia. The government's cover-up of the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination was a different kind of secrecy. It was not a single grand conspiracy, but a complex web of lies, intentional misdirection, and a desire to control a volatile political situation. The FBI, under the directorship of J. Edgar Hoover, had long considered King a threat, and had a known history of attempting to discredit him. The possibility that elements of the government or a vast criminal network could have been involved was simply too dangerous to admit. It would have created an even greater wave of civil unrest and exposed a deep, sinister underbelly of American power. The cover-up was not just about hiding a criminal act. It was about protecting a system, a set of institutions, and a way of life. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. stands as a testament to the power of a secret that lives on in the hearts of a people, a truth that is widely believed even when the official record denies it. The civil trial was a powerful moment of legal acknowledgement, a quiet victory for justice that stands in stark contrast to the decades of official denial. It is a story that proves that even the most monumental of lies can be exposed, not by a single whistleblower or a single piece of evidence, but by the slow collective work of those who are unwilling to let a tragic truth be buried forever. It is a secret that continues to haunt America, a secret that speaks to the deepest fears about who really holds power and what they are willing to do to keep it. From the solemn and painful truths of a political assassination, we drift now into a different kind of mystery, one that is less about a verifiable historical event and more about a deeply buried, whispered secret. Our destination is a remote and abandoned Air Force base on the eastern tip of Long Island, New York, a place known as Camp Hero. But in the annals of conspiracy lore, it has a more infamous name, Montauk. The story of Project Montauk is not one of a single, sudden tragedy, but of a decades-long program so bizarre and unsettling that it is the ultimate example of a cover-up through sheer, bewildering fantasy. The secret isn't that something happened. The secret is the sheer impossibility of what is claimed to have happened. The story, as it is told in hushed tones and online forums, begins in the late 1960s and 70s. According to a small group of self-proclaimed whistleblowers, Camp Hero was the site of a top-secret government project, a continuation of a much older and more famous secret, the Philadelphia Experiment. That was the alleged naval experiment in 1943 that supposedly made a warship invisible and teleported it. The story of Montauk claims that the government having perfected its technology, moved its operations to the remote, isolated base. The purpose of the project was not military supremacy, but something far more chilling: mind control, time travel, and even contact with extraterrestrial life. The alleged experiments began with the most terrifying of all human sciences: the manipulation of the human mind. The project, it is claimed, used advanced electromagnetic and psychic technologies to conduct mass mind control experiments on the public. They would broadcast signals from a massive radar dish, a looming skeletal structure that still stands at the site today, a relic of a more innocent age. The secret history claims that this technology was so advanced it could manipulate emotions, implant thoughts, and even create a kind of psychic control over an entire population. But this was only the beginning of the secret. The story grows even more fantastic when it touches upon the claims of time travel. The project, it is rumored, developed a time portal or time vortex underneath the base, a door to other dimensions and other eras. People, most of them young men who were allegedly abducted and subjected to the experiments, were sent through this portal. They were sent to the past and the future. Some were sent on secret missions, others to explore the possibilities of time itself. There are stories of trips to the future, where the world was a desolate wasteland, and trips to the past to collect historical artifacts. One of the most famous and most impossible of the stories is that some of the participants were sent to Mars, where they had encounters with strange beings and technologies. But the most bizarre and terrifying part of the alleged Montauk cover-up is the story of its end. According to the legend, the scientists in charge of the project became obsessed with manifesting a creature from another dimension. They found a powerful psychic, a man named Duncan Cameron, who, it is claimed, was a central figure in the experiments. They put him in a chair, a kind of psychic amplifier, and used him to open a portal to another dimension. But instead of manifesting a benign creature, he created a monstrous hulking beast, a terrifying creature that materialized and began to tear the facility apart. The monster, which was described as being a kind of psychic manifestation of the collective fear of everyone in the room, was so powerful that it was said to have destroyed the underground base and led to the immediate and complete termination of the project. The government's response to all of these wild claims has been a blanket of complete silence. There is no official statement, no grand denial, no press conference. The official story is that Camp Hero was simply a Cold War Air Force base, and when its mission was over, it was decommissioned and turned into a state park. This absolute and utter denial is the very heart of the cover-up. The secret is so preposterous that the government doesn't even have to deny it. The rumors themselves are so fantastic that they do the work of the cover-up for them. The story of Montauk is the perfect example of a secret that is hidden not by force or by censorship, but by a kind of psychological warfare, a strategic embrace of absurdity. The lie is the fact that the secret is so unbelievable that no one would ever take it seriously. The story of Project Montauk is the ultimate cover-up. It is a modern-day ghost story, a Cold War legend, and a testament to the power of a rumor when it is given a silent, empty space to grow. It is a secret that proves that sometimes the biggest lies are not the ones that are told, but the ones that are left for you to discover on your own, a whisper in the dark that is too strange to be true, and yet, in the quiet of the night, it feels too strange not to be. From the whispered secrets of a Cold War ghost story, we return to the light of the present day, to a familiar mystery that has long been the subject of ridicule and fantasy. We're talking, of course, about UFOs, or as the US government now formally refers to them, unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs. For decades, the government's official position was one of complete and utter denial. Reports of strange objects in the sky were dismissed as weather balloons, optical illusions, or the simple products of overactive imaginations. This was a cover-up built not on lies, but on a powerful tool of control, ridicule. The secret was so powerful that the only way to hide it was to make it seem utterly ridiculous. But in recent years, that carefully constructed wall of denial has begun to crumble. The US government, in a series of quiet and stunning moves, has slowly, deliberately begun to peel back the layers of its own secrecy. It began with the declassification of 3 short, grainy videos captured by US Navy fighter pilots. The videos, now known as Go Fast, Gimbal, and the famous Tic Tac video, showed objects moving in ways that defied all known laws of physics and aerodynamics. They zipped through the air at incredible speeds, made impossible turns, and had no visible means of propulsion. The government's acknowledgement of these videos, and its admission that it could not explain what the objects were, was the first real crack in a secret that had been held for over 70 years. It was a stunning reversal of a long-standing policy of denial. But the most significant and dramatic breach in this long-running cover-up came not from a grainy video, but from the sworn testimony of a single man. His name is David Grush, a decorated veteran and a former intelligence officer who was tasked by the US government with investigating and reporting on UAPs. Grush was not a UFO enthusiast or a fringe conspiracy theorist. He was a highly placed and respected member of the intelligence community. In a shocking and unprecedented hearing before a congressional subcommittee, Grush made claims that, if true, would represent the single greatest cover-up in human history. Speaking under oath, Grush alleged that the US government has been running a secret decades-long program to retrieve and reverse-engineer crash-landed craft of non-human origin. He claimed that he had interviewed dozens of witnesses who had first-hand knowledge of these programs. He testified that the government was not only in possession of these off-world vehicles, but that it was also in possession of the biologics, or bodies, of the pilots. It was a direct modern-day echo of the rumors that have haunted the Roswell incident for decades. But this time, the claim was not coming from a retired military officer or a journalist. It was coming from a former intelligence official in a public hearing, under oath. The secret, which was once relegated to the fringes, was now a matter of public record, a fact being debated in the highest halls of power. The cover-up, as Grush described it, was not just a simple denial. It was a complex, multi-layered and deeply secretive system. The programs, he claimed, were so compartmentalized that no one person had a full picture. The operations were run outside of congressional oversight, in a kind of black hole of funding and accountability. It was a deliberate, sophisticated effort to keep the secret not just from the public, but from most of the government itself. The lie was not simply a statement. It was a vast bureaucratic architecture of secrecy, a system of plausible deniability designed to ensure that no one could ever fully uncover the truth. The very structure of the cover-up was the secret itself. The story of the UFO cover-up is the perfect final chapter in our journey through history's greatest secrets. It is a story that is still unfolding, a mystery that has yet to be solved. It proves that even in an age of unprecedented information and instant communication, some secrets can be so well guarded and so mind-bending that they can be hidden in plain sight for decades. The pursuit of the truth in this case is not just about a single event, like a crash or a lie, but about the very nature of our place in the universe. It is a story that brings together all the themes we have explored: the power of government, the manipulation of the public, and the relentless search for a truth that is being deliberately kept from us. It is a secret that reminds us that the human story is far from over, and that some of the greatest mysteries and the most closely guarded secrets may be waiting just outside the edge of our perception, on the final frontier of the unknown. As you drift off to sleep, let your mind ponder the secrets that are still out there, waiting to be revealed, and rest in the knowledge that the pursuit of truth is an ongoing and endless journey. From the unsettling whispers of a modern technological secret, we drift now back in time to the cold, churning waters of the North Atlantic. The year is 1915. World War I is raging in Europe, and the seas are a new and terrifying battlefield. Our story is not of a grand, coordinated conspiracy like Watergate, but a quiet, calculated lie about a single tragic event. It is a story of a ship, a submarine, and a government willing to risk the lives of thousands to draw a nation into war. This is the story of the sinking of the RMS Lusitania and the secret that was buried at the bottom of the sea. The Lusitania was not just a passenger liner, it was a symbol of an era. Fast, luxurious, and the pride of the Cunard Line, it was seen as an unsinkable fortress of the sea, a ship so fast that it was believed no German submarine or U-boat could ever catch it. But as war raged, the rules of the sea had changed. Germany had declared the waters around Great Britain a war zone and warned that any Allied ship entering it would be sunk without warning. The German embassy even took out a newspaper advertisement in New York, warning passengers not to board the Lusitania. But the warnings were largely ignored. It was a bluff, people thought, and the ship's speed was its best defense. On May 1st, 1915, the Lusitania departed from New York on its way to Liverpool. On board were nearly 2,000 passengers and crew, including 128 Americans. On the morning of May 7th, the ship was making its way along the coast of Ireland when it was spotted by the German U-boat U-20. At 2:10 p.m., the submarine fired a single torpedo. It struck the Lusitania on its starboard side, just below the bridge. The impact was powerful, but what happened next was the mystery that would fuel a century of conspiracy theories. Almost immediately after the first explosion, a second, much larger explosion occurred. This second blast tore the ship apart from the inside, causing it to list so severely that the lifeboats on one side were rendered unusable. Within just 18 minutes, the great ship had disappeared beneath the waves, taking with it 198 lives. The world was in shock. The sinking was a public relations disaster for Germany, and a powerful rallying cry for the British and their allies. The official narrative, which was quickly established by a British inquiry led by Lord Mersey, was simple and unequivocal. The Lusitania was an unarmed passenger ship, a victim of German barbarism and a violation of all laws of war. The Germans, to their credit, argued that the ship was a legitimate military target because it was carrying war materials. But the British government vehemently denied this, and for decades the official story held firm. The sinking of the Lusitania, a single act of unprovoked aggression, became a central piece of propaganda used to rally support for the war effort and ultimately to help persuade the United States to join the conflict 2 years later. But the secret, the cover-up, lay in the cargo manifest. While the British government claimed the ship was an innocent passenger liner, the Germans had a different story. They claimed to have evidence that the Lusitania was carrying a massive amount of munitions, a claim that was widely dismissed as German propaganda. But the conspiracy theory that the British government, and specifically Winston Churchill, then the First Lord of the Admiralty, had knowingly put the ship in harm's way, began to gain traction. The theory suggested that the British had deliberately removed the ship's naval escort, and even more sinisterly, that the second, more powerful explosion was not caused by a German torpedo, but by the detonation of the ship's own secret cargo of explosives. The cover-up in this case was a slow, deliberate denial of a single inconvenient fact, that the Lusitania was not an innocent ship. It wasn't until decades later that the truth, or at least a more complicated version of it, began to emerge. Research into the ship's cargo manifest confirmed that it was, in fact, carrying a significant amount of munitions, including millions of rounds of rifle ammunition and hundreds of tons of artillery shells. This was a crucial piece of the puzzle, because under the rules of war at the time, a civilian vessel carrying munitions could be considered a legitimate military target. The government's lie that the ship was innocent was designed to paint Germany as a monstrous aggressor and to manipulate public opinion. The official inquiry, led by Lord Mersey, was also a part of the cover-up. Lord Mersey, who had previously headed the inquiry into the sinking of the Titanic, was widely suspected of being sympathetic to the British government's position. He was an honourable man, but his final report was incredibly convenient for the British war effort. It completely ignored the evidence of a second explosion and placed all of the blame on Germany. The real secret was not just the cargo, but the fact that the British government, with the help of a compliant inquiry, had successfully manipulated the narrative to serve its own political goals. The sinking of the Lusitania was not just a tragedy of war, it was a political secret, a lie that was told and maintained for decades to justify a nation's actions. It is a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest secrets are not the ones that are buried, but the ones that are floating right on the surface of history, waiting for someone to dive down and find them. From the choppy, treacherous waters of the Atlantic and the calculated deceptions of war, we drift back now to American soil, to a moment of both triumph and profound tragedy. The year is 1865. The American Civil War has just ended. The Union has been preserved, but the nation is in a state of fragile, uncertain peace. In this tense atmosphere, a single act of violence would forever change the course of history, and a secret would be born that has haunted America for over a century. This is the story of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and the persistent belief that the full truth was hidden not by the conspirators, but by the very government that sought to avenge him. The official story is a well-known part of American folklore. On the night of April 14, 1865, President Lincoln and his wife Mary were attending a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The assassin was a famous actor and Confederate sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth. Booth, in a dramatic act of political vengeance, slipped into the president's box, shot him in the back of the head, and then leaped onto the stage, shouting, "Sic semper tyrannis! Thus always to tyrants!" He then made his escape in the chaotic aftermath. The act was meant to be a final, desperate blow to a defeated nation. Booth was not alone. He had a small band of co-conspirators who were to assassinate the vice president and the Secretary of State as well. The plot was a failure on all fronts except one. Lincoln died the next morning, and the nation plunged into a state of shock and mourning. The government's response was swift and decisive. A massive manhunt was launched for Booth and his accomplices. He was tracked down in a barn in Virginia, and after a brief standoff, he was killed. His accomplices were captured, put on trial, and convicted, with several of them being hanged. The government concluded that this small group of Confederate loyalists, acting on their own, was solely responsible for the crime. This was the official narrative, a clean and contained story that blamed a few desperate individuals. But for many, even at the time, this story was too simple, too convenient. The cover-up, it is believed, was not to protect the assassins, but to hide a much larger and more terrifying truth. The central piece of evidence that fuels the conspiracy theories is a small leather-bound book, John Wilkes Booth's diary. After Booth was cornered and killed, his body and possessions were recovered. Among them was his diary, which was immediately confiscated by the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. The diary was a crucial piece of evidence. It was expected to reveal the names of his co-conspirators and the full extent of the plot. But when it was finally produced at the trial of his accomplices, something was wrong. It had pages missing. The front pages of the diary which were believed to contain a detailed account of the assassination and the names of those who helped him, were gone. The diary was a broken narrative, with a mysterious gap at its most crucial point. The government's explanation for the missing pages was vague and unconvincing. They claimed they had simply been lost, or perhaps never existed. But for those who sought the truth, the missing pages were the proof of a cover-up. What was on those pages? Whose names were so powerful that they had to be erased from the historical record? The mystery of the missing diary pages points to a much darker and more extensive conspiracy. Many historians and researchers believe that the assassination was not an act of a few Confederate zealots, but a much more complex plot involving powerful figures who stood to benefit from Lincoln's death. Lincoln had a plan for a compassionate, swift reconstruction of the South, a plan that was vehemently opposed by a group of radical Republicans in his own party. The belief is that these figures who wanted to punish the South and seize control of the government were involved in the plot. Lincoln's death allowed them to implement their vision for a more punitive reconstruction. The cover-up in this theory was led by Secretary of War Edwin Stanton himself, a man who, in the chaotic hours after the assassination, had complete control over the investigation and all of the evidence. The alleged cover-up also involved a number of suspicious events and a general sense of official misdirection. The military command in Washington, D.C. was strangely lax in its security, with the officer assigned to protect Lincoln's box at the theater inexplicably absent from his post. Key witnesses were not questioned, and others were silenced. The trial of the conspirators was a hurried military tribunal, not a public civilian trial, which allowed for a much more controlled and secretive process. The government's narrative was a tight, simple story, and it was a story they wanted the nation to believe in order to bring an end to the long, painful conflict and move on. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln is a tragedy, but the secrets surrounding it make it a permanent, unsolved mystery. The cover-up, it is believed, was a kind of a national lie told for a greater good. The nation was too fragile, too close to tearing itself apart, to handle the truth of a wide-ranging conspiracy. It needed a simple villain, a quick resolution, and a new path forward. The missing pages of Booth's diary are a haunting reminder that even at the most critical moments in history, the truth can be a casualty, buried under the weight of political necessity. It is a story that proves that sometimes the biggest secrets are not hidden in the shadows, but are found in the very public act of a nation choosing to believe a convenient lie. From the political conspiracies of a nation divided, we turn now to a very different kind of secret, one that rests at the bottom of the icy Atlantic, a secret sealed by tragedy and the unforgiving sea. The year is 1912. The world is watching as the largest, most luxurious ship ever built, the RMS Titanic, sets sail on its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York. The ship was a marvel of engineering, a floating palace of unimaginable grandeur, and it was widely touted by its owners and the press as unsinkable. This was not just a ship, it was a symbol of human progress and hubris. But in the early morning hours of April 15th, that symbol of invincibility met its end, and a legend was born. The official story is a timeless tragedy. The Titanic, steaming ahead through the dark, frigid waters of the North Atlantic, hit an iceberg. The massive gash in its side was too much for the ship's watertight compartments to handle. It sank slowly, a grand, agonizing death, with over 150 people losing their lives. The inquiries that followed in both the United States and Great Britain were swift and thorough. The blame was placed on a series of failures: the lack of a proper lookout, the inadequate number of lifeboats, and the ship's reckless speed in a known ice field. The official story was a clean, if heartbreaking, narrative of human error and natural disaster. But for decades, a persistent undercurrent of suspicion and doubt has suggested that the real secret was not the iceberg, but what the ship was hiding and who was really on board. The first and most enduring of the cover-up theories is what is known as the Olympic switch. The Titanic had a sister ship, the RMS Olympic, which had been in service for a year before the Titanic's launch. In September 1911, the Olympic was involved in a serious collision with a British warship, the HMS Hawke. The damage was significant, and the Olympic was brought back to port for extensive repairs. The conspiracy theory alleges that the White Star Line, the owner of both ships, was in a dire financial situation. The Olympic's damage was extensive, and insurance claims would be difficult. To solve this problem, it is claimed, the White Star Line hatched a daring and sinister plan to secretly switch the two ships. They would patch up the damaged Olympic, rename it the Titanic, and deliberately send it to its demise on its maiden voyage. This would allow them to collect the insurance money on a new ship and be rid of a damaged one. The evidence for this theory is found in subtle differences between the ships, and in the fact that the Titanic's captain, Edward Smith, who had previously commanded the Olympic, appeared strangely unconcerned by the dangers of the ice field. But an even more compelling and chilling secret is the theory of a coal fire. It is a fact, documented by photographs and eyewitness accounts, that a massive coal fire had been burning in one of the ship's coal bunkers for days, if not weeks, before the maiden voyage. The fire was so intense that it had to be continuously doused with water, and the stokers worked relentlessly to contain it. The official inquiries completely downplayed the fire, but researchers and historians have argued that the fire was much more serious than was ever admitted. The intense heat would have weakened the steel of the ship's hull in the exact location where the iceberg struck. According to this theory, the impact of the iceberg, which should have been survivable for an unsinkable ship, was made catastrophic by a pre-existing flaw. The ship was not in pristine condition. It was already mortally wounded before it ever left port. The secret, the cover-up, was to hide a flaw that would have been a massive scandal and a financial nightmare for the White Star Line. The cover-up in this case was not about a single grand lie, but a systematic downplaying of the truth. The inquiries simply ignored the elephant in the room. They focused on the iceberg, the number of lifeboats, and the ship's speed. They did not want to delve into the more mundane and embarrassing truth that the pride of the White Star Line had set sail with a raging fire in its belly, a fire that had compromised the structural integrity of the ship. The secret was so mundane and so easily verifiable that the only way to hide it was to simply not talk about it. The Titanic's story, then, is a tragedy with a secret. The cover-up was a quiet, deliberate conspiracy to bury the inconvenient truth under the grand, tragic narrative of a battle with nature. The secret was hidden in plain sight, in the soot-covered faces of the firemen, in the scorching heat of the boiler room, and in the telltale signs of a weakened hull. It is a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest secrets are not the ones that are far-fetched and fantastic, but the ones that are so simple, so painfully human, that we simply refuse to see them. The Titanic did not sink because of a switch, or because of a mysterious conspiracy. It sank perhaps because a secret, a quiet fire was burning from the inside out. From the cold, dark depths of the Atlantic and the tragic secrets of a sunken ship, we drift now to a place of ancient sun-baked sand and a secret buried for thousands of years. The year is 1922, and the world is captivated by a story of discovery and immense wealth, a story that would forever be shrouded in a veil of mystery and a whispered curse. This is the story of the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun, the boy king of Egypt, and the alleged secret that the greatest archaeological find in history was not as pristine as the world was led to believe. The official story is a tale of perseverance and incredible luck. For years, the British archaeologist Howard Carter funded by the wealthy Lord Carnarvon, had been searching for the tomb of Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. He was an obsessed and meticulous man, and after years of fruitless digging, he was on the verge of giving up. But on November 4th, 1922, his team found a step cut into the rock, the beginning of a staircase that led down to a sealed door. He knew in that moment that he had found something extraordinary. He sent a telegram to Lord Carnarvon. "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact." It was a claim that would define the discovery for a century, but it was also perhaps the first great lie of the cover-up. For the next 2 months, the world held its breath. On November 26th, Carter, with Carnarvon at his side, made a small hole in the tomb's outer door. When Carnarvon asked if he could see anything, Carter famously replied, "Yes, wonderful things." And he was right. The world was given a glimpse into a time capsule of ancient Egypt, a tomb filled with untold riches, golden chariots, ornate thrones, statues, and the famous death mask of the boy king himself. The official narrative was that the tomb was untouched, a pristine archaeological marvel, a moment frozen in time. The cover-up, it is believed, was to hide the more unsettling and human truth. The first hint of a secret came not from the tomb itself, but from the mysterious and tragic deaths that began to follow the discovery. The curse of the pharaohs became a global sensation. Lord Carnarvon, the man who funded the discovery, died just 5 months later from an infected mosquito bite. Other members of the expedition also died under strange circumstances. The media, hungry for a good story, seized on the curse, and it became a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. This narrative, the idea that a supernatural force was protecting the tomb, served as an excellent smokescreen for a more mundane, but far more serious, secret. The real cover-up, it is believed, was not about a curse, but about a crime. The claim that the tomb was intact was, in fact, a lie. Researchers and historians have since argued that the tomb had been entered at least twice before its official discovery. Carter, who had been digging for years in the area, would have known this. The evidence lies in the fact that some of the doors and seals inside the tomb were not as pristine as Carter claimed. More importantly, it is alleged that Carter and his team, in the 2 weeks between the initial discovery of the tomb and the official opening, secretly went inside the burial chambers and removed some of the most valuable artifacts. The lie of an untouched tomb was designed to conceal the fact that the archaeologists themselves were, in a sense, the first tomb robbers of the modern era. The evidence for this claim is not just circumstantial. A small number of artifacts, including a golden head of a cheetah, were found in Carter's personal collection after his death. These items were never listed in the official inventory of the tomb. Other items, which were known to exist in the tomb, simply vanished and were never recorded. The secret was a quiet and personal one, a violation of archaeological ethics and a crime against the integrity of the discovery. The cover-up was not a grand conspiracy to deceive a nation, but a professional deception, a quiet agreement between Carter and his team to keep the truth from the world. The legacy of the cover-up is that a beautiful magical story was built on a small human deception. The curse of the pharaohs was not a real curse, but a powerful diversion, a kind of misdirection that allowed the world to believe a simpler, more dramatic story. The true secret was that the greatest archaeological find in history was also, perhaps, the site of one of its first great cover-ups. The story of Tutankhamun's tomb reminds us that sometimes the most profound secrets are not hidden in the great events of history, but are found in the quiet human acts of greed and ambition. The truth, like the tomb itself, was a treasure, but one that was plundered and hidden in plain sight, a secret waiting for us to find it, not in the supernatural, but in the most human of all places, the quiet desire for fame and fortune. From the ancient sun-baked sands of Egypt and the secrets of a pharaoh's tomb, we return to a modern tragedy that left a permanent scar on the American psyche. The year is 1995. The place is Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, a quiet, unassuming city in the heart of the country. The date is April 19th. At 9:02 a.m., a massive truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, a devastating act of domestic terrorism that killed 168 people, including 19 children. It was, at the time, the deadliest act of terrorism on U.S. soil. The government's response was swift, and the official story was presented to the American people as a clean, simple, and shocking narrative. A lone wolf act of vengeance carried out by two disgruntled American citizens. The official story centers on Timothy McVeigh and his accomplice, Terry Nichols. According to the FBI and federal prosecutors, McVeigh, an anti-government extremist and former soldier, was fueled by a deep-seated hatred of the federal government, a hatred that was cemented by the events at Waco and Ruby Ridge. He and Nichols spent months planning the attack. McVeigh was captured just hours after the bombing, and he was later convicted, along with Nichols, for his role in the crime. The narrative was simple and straightforward. Two men, acting on their own, had committed a horrific act of violence. This was the story the government wanted the public to believe, a story that would help a traumatized nation find a sense of closure. But just as with so many other historical events, this clean and simple narrative was immediately and powerfully challenged by a series of unsettling contradictions and questions that have never been fully answered. The first major crack in the official story came from the witnesses themselves. Numerous people, including employees in the Murrah building and bystanders on the street, described seeing a second person with McVeigh in the truck just moments before the blast. They described him as a stocky, dark-haired man and gave the FBI a detailed composite sketch. He was quickly dubbed John Doe 2. The problem was that John Doe 2 was never found. The official investigation, once it settled on McVeigh and Nichols as the sole perpetrators, seemed to completely lose interest in finding this other man. Witnesses who insisted they saw a second person were reportedly ignored or dismissed. The FBI's official position became that John Doe 2 was likely a hallucination or a case of mistaken identity. For many, this was the first clear sign of a cover-up, an official investigation that was intentionally shut down to protect a convenient narrative. Another unsettling detail that fueled this suspicion was the matter of the missing surveillance footage. The Murrah building, like most federal buildings, had a number of security cameras on its exterior and surrounding properties. In the aftermath of the bombing, the FBI quickly collected all of the footage from these cameras. A full analysis of this footage was never released to the public, and it was claimed that much of the footage had been destroyed in the blast or was simply not relevant. But witnesses and independent investigators who had seen the footage claimed that it clearly showed McVeigh and another man in the Ryder truck. The FBI's unwillingness to release this footage, coupled with its dismissive attitude toward the eyewitnesses, created a powerful sense that a more extensive conspiracy was being deliberately hidden. The cover-up allegations went even deeper. Some people who had known McVeigh and Nichols testified that they believed the two men were part of a larger network, not a small, isolated group. Others, including some intelligence officials, alleged that the government had a degree of foreknowledge about the attack, but failed to act. One of the most haunting and credible of these allegations came from German intelligence, which claimed it had warned U.S. officials about a potential attack in Oklahoma City a week before the bombing. These warnings were, allegedly, ignored. The government's official stance on these claims was, again, a simple and firm denial. The Oklahoma City bombing is a powerful and tragic example of a modern-day cover-up. The secret is not that the bombing happened, but who was truly responsible. The official story, while it led to the conviction of the two men, left so many questions unanswered. It presented a simple, isolated crime to a public, that was desperately looking for a straightforward explanation. But the inconsistencies, the eyewitness accounts of a second man, the missing surveillance footage, the allegations of government foreknowledge, all point to a much more complex and terrifying truth. The cover-up, it is believed, was to prevent a full and thorough investigation that might have revealed a deeper, more unsettling conspiracy, one that might have involved more people than the government was willing to admit. As you drift into sleep, let your mind rest on this final thought, that the pursuit of truth is a journey that never truly ends. We have explored secrets that are millennia old, and secrets that are still unfolding. The secrets of history, whether they are about an ancient tomb or a modern tragedy, are a reminder that the official story is often just a starting point. The real secrets are always a bit more complicated, a bit more human, and a bit more unsettling. As the world goes to sleep, the secret history of our past and the unanswered questions of our present rest quietly, waiting to be rediscovered. Good night.